What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So there are very few things, if any at all, that can claim they have been as successful or more successful than Pokemon has in modern history. But you know what? That's not the way it should have turned out. Honestly, Pokemon should have failed fast and it should have failed hard. Now, that's obviously not me saying that I wished it would have failed, because obviously that's completely untrue, but with the way things shaked out, Pokemon really shouldn't have been more than just a short-lived thing that didn't survive more than just a couple years. So today we're going to be talking about why that is, and what caused Pokemon to avoid that fate and become what it is today. Let's check it out. Now, Pokemon was having a rough time before it even got itself off the ground, because Nintendo actually initially rejected the idea when it was initially pitched by its creator, Satoshi Tajiri. When Tajiri pitched the idea of Pokemon, Nintendo were confused by the concept and couldn't really wrap their heads around it. However, they did see enough potential in the idea to send Tajiri off with one of their top executives, a Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto, in order to mentor Tajiri and help him refine the idea further until they felt comfortable enough approving it. Now, obviously, getting to have the one and only Shigeru Miyamoto mentor you isn't really the rockiest of starts in the grand scheme of things. However, the fact that Nintendo initially rejected the idea in the first place just goes to show you kind of the hurdles that Pokemon has gone through even before it was even really in the beta stages of development, and frankly, it only got worse from there. Once Pokemon finally got approved by Nintendo and finally entered the development stage, it had just about as bad of a development cycle as you could possibly hope for as a game developer. First off, the original Pokemon games, Red and Green, took 6 years to develop. They were in development from 1990 until 1996, and if you follow game development in any way, shape, or form, you should know that games usually do not take this long to develop, let alone a Game Boy game of all things, and when they do, it becomes very risky as to whether or not they are going to turn out as good as the developers hoped, because we've seen a lot of games that have been in development for a long time that have actually become some of the worst games of all time. On top of this, like I said, this was a Game Boy game. Granted, this was the 90s, so technological understanding was a little bit more primitive, and so that kind of evens things out, but we're working with much smaller files here on the Game Boy, and obviously there's no textures to worry about, there's no polygons like there is in modern 3D gaming, so the fact that it took 6 years with just bits and pieces of data and just 8-bit sprites and just the primitive nature of the Game Boy itself really shows you how tough it was to develop these games. On top of this, even though the games took 6 years to develop, they were still riddled with bugs upon their final release. As we all know, the games have a number of glitches, exploits, and things that can actually crash the game, and this is actually a part of what caused the initial video game crash back in 1983, so this very well could have spelled the end for Pokemon if it wasn't for a couple lucky breaks like the Mew glitch. And just to top it all off, the development of Pokemon almost destroyed Game Freak as a company before they even got a chance to release the game that they were founded for. Game Freak almost went bankrupt in the process of developing Pokemon, so much so that they wouldn't have even been able to release the game if it wasn't for Creatures Inc. stepping in and funding the rest of the project in exchange for a 1/3 ownership of Pokemon's copyright. Even the CEO, creator, headman, director himself, Satoshi Tajiri, did not even take a salary during part or all of Pokemon's development, instead living completely off of his father's income, which shows just how committed he was to this project, but also shows just how dire and desperate times were during the development of Red and Green. However, by some miracle of video game magic, Pokemon got out of this terrible development cycle and finally got their games on store shelves in 1996. However, even though they finally got past this rough development patch, there were still challenges that they would face as Pokemon was attacked and riddled with controversies almost immediately after it was released. Just as Pokemon started to pick up the pace a little bit and gain popularity, it was attacked by a number of different things. You had the Electric Soldier Porygon seizure incident, which under any other circumstances and for any other franchise most assuredly would have caused its demise, and then you had a number of public attacks against Pokemon, like lawsuits from people like Uri Geller. You had the incident where a child actually died as the result of a Pokemon toy. You had things like claims of glorified animal abuse and Pokemon making light of animal fights and different things like that. Just about everything under the sun that Pokemon could be attacked for, it was attacked for, and it really seemed like people just wanted to take advantage of the popularity of Pokemon and just really wanted to see it fail for some reason. However, by some miracle of the video game gods, Pokemon was able to get out of this state of public controversy and once again get back on track and start to become more and more popular as it sought out to do. However, even this was potentially halted, and this time it could have been halted by the creators themselves. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you probably know, Pokemon was supposed to end after Generation 2, and Tsunekazu Ishihara, who is the current CEO of the Pokemon Company and was a producer for Red and Green at the time of its release, has been on record as stating that he did not think even the anime would go after 1998. So, for as popular as Pokemon was at the time, it was actually going to ultimately kill itself off, and when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, Pokemon would have ended after just a 2 to 3 year run, even as popular as it was. And for me personally, it would have ended by the time I was only 6 years old, and even if it was popular or even more popular than it proved to be at that time, it would have only been a 2 to 3 year thing. And it would have ended when we were all still little kids, and we would definitely not be talking about it at this time just because we would have been too young and too kind of naive to really remember that experience and carry it with us to the point where we were adults. So even though Pokemon made it past all of the trials and tribulations, it made it past all of the public controversies, it still could have been seen as a failure even after all of that, because it could have ended its own successful run and basically only been a fad that lasted 2 to 3 years that ended when we were still all little kids. And at the end of the day, even if Pokemon proved to be successful in that amount of time, it still could have been seen as a failure and just a fad or just a momentary craze, because it's very likely if it only lasted 2 to 3 years that none of us would be giving it any thought at all as adults today. However, even though Pokemon ultimately decided to continue after Generation 2, and they made the commitment to keep the franchise going for the long haul, even this could have got thwarted after everything else that had happened by one simple word: Microsoft. During late 1999 and early 2000, when Generation 2 was about to come out in Japan and Pokemon was about to get to the point where they decided we're gonna keep going and we're gonna keep making Pokemon games, Microsoft actually offered to buy Nintendo for $25 billion. This was actually a very serious offer by Microsoft because Microsoft themselves were getting ready to release their Xbox, and they wanted to buy Nintendo to get rid of some of their competition and have them make games for the Xbox instead of making console hardware. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, because this most assuredly would have spelled the end of Pokemon for good, even after all of that other crap they got through, for a number of different reasons. Number one is the obvious one, and that's because Microsoft wanted Nintendo to make games and not hardware. However, as we all know, Pokemon is a handheld system, but Microsoft, releasing the Xbox, did not release a companion handheld device to go along with it. So Pokemon wouldn't really have had a console to release on had Microsoft bought Nintendo and had Nintendo just made games from Microsoft. On top of this, Microsoft is already known for destroying beloved franchises and video game studios. They bought Rare Studios in the early 2000s, which was responsible for amazing games like Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and more, and I think we all know what happened there. After a botched game or two that just completely destroyed Pokemon's reputation, it likely would have fallen into obscurity for good, and we wouldn't have even seen any more Pokemon games, not because Game Freak decided to end it themselves on their own good terms, but because Microsoft would have pounded it into the ground and just would have disgraced the Pokemon franchise for time and all eternity. So there it is. Now, usually I just report on the facts here, but this video has a little bit more of a theme to it. When Satoshi Tajiri first laid his eyes on a Game Boy in 1989, his dream for Pokemon was born, and as we just discussed, anything and everything was thrown at him to try and get his idea to fail. But Mr. Tajiri had something inside of him that caused Pokemon to defy the odds and become the juggernaut it is today, and that is passion. Tajiri refused to let his dream die because he believed in it, and he believed in himself that he could make it happen. Things clearly got very bad for him at one point, because at one point he wasn't even making a penny off of his work. But it was his willingness to push through the hard times and see it through to the end that caused us to sit where we are right now today, talking about Pokemon with smiles on our faces. So if you're watching this and you have a dream, go out there and chase it, and don't be afraid, because you can fail and fail and fail and fail and still have your dreams come true as long as you just keep going. With that said though, thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like and let me know in the comments below what you thought of this, and give me a reason why you're thankful Pokemon is around today. If you enjoyed the video and you're new to the channel, be sure to also subscribe as well. I upload Pokemon content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There's plenty of stuff to watch, and if you enjoy my remixes, consider following me over on Spotify, because we're running a contest over there. If we can hit 1,500 followers by the time the Let's Go games come out, I will give away a copy of each, so I would really love to do that for you guys. Anyways though, with all that being said, I will be back on Thursday with another video, so can't wait to see you then. Until then though, as always, I will smell you guys later.